This man was once the best Special Forces operative in the United States Navy. At that time, he was agile, with sharp eyes, and during a hostage rescue mission, he and his teammates worked seamlessly together, without any mistakes. His shooting skills were so precise it was terrifying. One could say he never missed. In short, he had silently infiltrated the enemy's stronghold. What he saw before him filled him with rage. A group of terrorists was threatening innocent hostages. In the moment when the hostages' lives were at risk, just one more second and they would be dead. The man did not hesitate and decisively pulled the trigger. One accurate shot went straight into the head of the terrorist. With his teammates' cooperation, they quickly dealt with the remaining enemies, and in the blink of an eye, they sent the terrorists to their fate and successfully rescued the hostages. Of course, that was his past achievement. The man's name was Bruno, and behind the hero image, there was an unshakable pain. The sacrifice of his teammates had caused Bruno to collapse. He left the military, and the glory of the past was now a distant memory. The once powerful warrior was now left alone in a bar, using alcohol to numb himself. At this moment, a seductive woman walked over. She seemed very interested in Bruno. Seeing him sitting alone, she took the initiative to start a conversation, casting him a meaningful glance and asking if he wanted to play something stimulating. Bruno glanced at her, his eyes empty and emotionless. He didn't care about the woman's teasing. It seemed he wasn't interested in anything anymore. But this beautiful woman clearly wasn't going to give up easily. Bruno was the prey she had set her sights on, and how could she let him go so easily? She took the initiative to grab Bruno's necklace. Her appearance seemed casual, but in reality, she was looking for a weakness to exploit. When she found out Bruno had once been a soldier, a hint of shock flashed across her face, though it was barely noticeable. Bruno noticed her intentions and yanked the necklace back. At that moment, when Bruno let his guard down, she secretly dropped a pill into his drink, a dangerous sedative. As the sedative began to take effect, Bruno suddenly felt dizzy and lightheaded. She took hold of his hand. By then, Bruno was no longer clear-headed, like a puppet being controlled. He followed her out of the bar. The woman led him through the bustling streets, with passers-by oblivious to the former hero walking among them. At this moment, Bruno had lost all consciousness, following the seductive woman wherever she led. The woman brought Bruno to an ATM. He mechanically inserted his bank card and withdrew a stack of money. After withdrawing the money, he handed it to the woman without hesitation. The money had come so easily. When Bruno slowly regained consciousness, he realized that two people were searching his pockets. It was then that he realized he had been robbed. Although he had been drugged, Bruno was still a highly trained Special Forces operative. The assailants even pulled out knives, but Bruno was not afraid. In fact, it sparked his fighting spirit. With just a few punches and kicks, he had already beaten up the three thugs, leaving them bruised and battered. However, the effects of the sedative were not to be underestimated. Bruno's mind had not fully recovered. After the fight, his body could no longer endure, giving the three thugs a chance. They struggled to get up and continued to strike Bruno, who was lying on the ground. That blow completely awakened the potential inside Bruno's body. At that moment, the thugs were completely stunned. They realized that the man before them was no ordinary person. Seeing this, they panicked and drew their guns. The situation was critical. In that moment of life and death, Bruno's instincts were once again awakened. He quickly seized one of the guns from the thugs with incredible speed. After taking down the thugs, Bruno, exhausted, sat on a chair, breathing heavily. As the fight subsided, the police received the report and arrived at the scene to clean up. This was the former Special Forces operative with extraordinary skills. After a series of dangerous and dramatic events, he was taken into temporary custody by the police. In the cold holding cell, Bruno spent a long night. Life behind bars was not easy. Eventually, he was rescued. His good friend Joe quickly arrived and pulled him out of the holding cell. Once home, Joe was far from idle. Unable to contain his frustration, he unloaded a barrage of complaints at Bruno. He grumbled that Bruno could never just stay out of trouble. Every week, Joe had to go to the holding cell to get him out. It had become a weekly routine, and it was truly becoming unbearable. Joe quickly changed the subject, mentioning the crucial matter of life, and began pushing Bruno to get married. He felt that Bruno could not continue living like this forever. He needed to quickly find a woman to marry and start a family. Only then would life get better. Facing Joe's endless nagging, Bruno remained silent, lowering his head to show that he didn't care. It was as if everything Joe said had nothing to do with him. Seeing that Bruno refused to listen, Joe dropped his joking tone, walked over to him, and began to advise him sincerely. Joe said, "I know you're upset, Bruno, but don't keep drinking away your sorrows because of the past. The dead can't come back, and you can't keep living in the past. Doing that won't solve anything. Bruno looked up at Joe with a complicated expression, feeling that Joe couldn't possibly understand his pain, and was still lost in his own world. Seeing that Bruno was still this way, Joe became angry. He raised his voice and shouted at Bruno, "You're being too selfish. You only think about yourself, wallowing in the pain of the past and refusing to let go. People need to learn to accept things. You can't keep running away forever." As night fell, Bruno was home alone, holding a cold gun in his hand. The inner turmoil inside him had reached its peak. Just then, the phone rang. It was his friend, Fitch, calling. When Fitch saw the gun in Bruno's hand during the video call, he immediately felt something was wrong and hurriedly asked what was going on. Bruno stayed silent for a moment, his face tired as he said that he had had a terrible night and woke up in the holding cell. Then, the two of them talked on the phone about what happened the previous night. Bruno explained how he met the woman at the bar, got drugged, and was eventually arrested by the police. When Fitch heard everything, she said she would start investigating and would do her best to help Bruno. The concern and promise from his friend felt like a warm ray of light, extinguishing Bruno's dark thoughts. The gun in his hand was put down. This phone call rekindled the hope of living in him. It seemed that the care from friends was the best salvation. The path of a hero is always full of obstacles. A strange sound woke him up from his sleep. He stood up, got out of bed, and followed the sound. When he opened the door, the sight before him astonished him. He suddenly noticed a woman lying collapsed outside his door. The woman was soaked, trembling, and looked incredibly weak. Bruno immediately went over to check on her and found that her condition was quite critical. After a while of emergency treatment, the woman slowly regained consciousness, coughing and vomiting a few mouthfuls of water. Bruno carefully lifted her onto the bed and gently dried her soaked hair. At that moment, Bruno became a tender and meticulous man. After stabilizing the girl, he began to get busy. He went to the kitchen to prepare some hot food to help her regain her strength. Just then, his good friend Fitch called to report on the progress of the investigation from the previous night. But now, Bruno's mind was entirely focused on the mysterious girl, and he had no interest in paying attention to Fitch. He answered the phone, saying he was busy and would contact him later. It seemed that even a hero couldn't escape the charm of a woman. Bruno brought a bowl of hot chicken soup to the bed, gently feeding it to the girl while comforting her, telling her not to be afraid, that this place was very safe. If she wanted to go to the hospital, he would be willing to take her there. Life suddenly seemed to have a new color. The next day, Bruno was different from usual, even smiling as he went to Joe's restaurant to help out. He excitedly shared with Joe about his brave actions the previous night, telling him that he had saved a girl. Upon hearing this, Joe immediately perked up, thinking to himself, could this guy have found some luck? However, when Bruno returned home, he found the house in disarray, with items thrown about, a chaotic scene. This immediately reminded him of the tragic scene when his teammates had sacrificed their lives, and his inner turmoil was once again consumed by painful memories. Just as he was lost in those painful memories, the woman he had saved suddenly stepped forward. In that moment, almost instinctively, Bruno looked at her with a fierce gaze, but when he saw that it was the innocent girl he was choking, he quickly regained his composure and realized he had grabbed the wrong person. He immediately released his grip. The sudden shock left the girl stunned and confused. To ease the tense atmosphere, the two of them went outside. Under the bright moonlight, they began a heartfelt conversation. Through their conversation, Bruno learned that this woman had lost her memory and didn't even know who she was. What made Bruno feel even more helpless was that she refused to go to the hospital for a checkup. Bruno looked at the girl helplessly before him. Since she didn't want to go to the hospital, he had no choice but to keep her at his house temporarily. After hearing about the situation, Joe felt suspicious of the girl's unknown background and advised Bruno to take her to the hospital as soon as possible. However, Bruno unexpectedly countered, "You used to urge me to find a girl to marry, and now that I have one right here, isn't that great?" This statement made Joe both amused and awkward. Had Bruno completely considered this amnesiac girl as an unexpected fate, or was he, deep down, seeking a new source of comfort? The power of love is truly great. Bruno went to the market to buy some food and found the girl sitting alone outside, looking sad. She then told Bruno that she vaguely remembered escaping from a place with flowers and fields, a place she didn't like being in. Hearing this, Bruno's curiosity was piqued. He asked her name. The girl tried to remember, and after a moment, she blurted out a name that stunned him, Athena. The goddess with no memory had finally remembered her name. In the following days, Bruno and Athena lived close to each other, spending their days together. Over time, their feelings for each other quickly grew warm, and Bruno gradually opened up to her, sharing how he had suffered from the loss of his brother, and would often go alone to the temple, seeking solace for his soul. Athena quietly listened, resting her head on Bruno's shoulder, offering him silent support and comfort. Her companionship was like a ray of sunlight shining into Bruno's darkened heart. Slowly, Bruno began to step out of the shadow of his past. Their relationship, once unfamiliar, naturally evolved into a romantic one. Athena's presence ultimately healed the emotional wounds Bruno had carried due to the loss of his brother. He had finally gathered the courage to burn the photo he had taken with his teammates. This act signaled that he was letting go of the past and embracing a new life. It could be said that love is truly the cure for all wounds. As they got to know each other, their bond deepened. Bruno shared this joy with his brother Joe and brought Athena to Joe's restaurant. As soon as Joe saw Athena, his eyes lit up. He greeted her warmly and praised her for being the one who helped Bruno start living responsibly. Joe had a very good impression of Athena. Shortly after, they reunited with Fitch. The four of them went out to the streets to begin a costume party. When Athena, dressed in a beautiful and graceful dress, stood before Bruno, someone who was accustomed to all kinds of situations, even he was stunned. It was as if he was looking at a beautiful goddess. In the days that followed, their life seemed to turn into a romantic movie. Every day was filled with sunshine and laughter. They spent a wonderful time together. Bruno had finally found peace and happiness in his soul. The darkness of his past gradually faded under Athena's companionship. Love truly has the power to make a person forget all their worries. One day, as the two of them were strolling through the streets, a tall man with a thick beard holding a phone appeared in the distance. As soon as Athena saw the bearded man, her complexion turned pale, as if she had seen something terrifying. She grabbed Bruno's hand, said nothing, and immediately ran away. Her speed was on par with an Olympic short-distance champion. Bruno, confused and completely unaware of what was happening, could only be pulled along by Athena as she ran frantically. He kept asking what was going on, but Athena kept repeating the same thing, as if the bearded man were some kind of vicious beast. Before Bruno could make sense of the situation, something even more terrifying happened. The bearded man seemed to have a GPS tracker, quietly appearing not far away, his gaze fixed on Athena like a hunter who had spotted his prey. Athena became even more frightened and rushed into the nearest restroom. Although Bruno was still a bit confused, seeing Athena trembling in fear, he could only gently comfort her, saying that everything would be okay and there was nothing to fear. Athena, however, cried uncontrollably, saying, "They've found me. I don't want to go back to them." It seemed that Athena was hiding a story no one knew about. Seeing the woman he loved in such pain, Bruno's anger flared up. He comforted Athena a few more times, then decided to go outside and confront the bearded man, wanting to shield Athena from whatever was happening. But sometimes, life is just unfair. As he reached a corner, thinking he might find the bearded man to settle things, the market suddenly exploded with the sound of gunshots. Screams and cries mixed together, and the once bustling market was completely drowned in the deafening gunfire, quickly turning into a battlefield. In the midst of the chaos, a man dressed in a flashy red suit stepped out from the crowd. His aura was powerful, and it was clear that he was a formidable figure. He ordered the bearded man to find Athena. At the same time, Bruno sprang into action. His shooting skills were still as precise as ever, still incredible. It seemed that Bruno had been practicing often, which allowed him to display such remarkable gunmanship in this life-or-death moment. Unfortunately, bullets eventually run out. When his gun ran out of ammunition, Bruno had no choice but to throw it aside and return to the most primal form of combat, hand-to-hand fighting. He fought the masked thugs without a weapon, relying on his quick reflexes and extraordinary strength. With just a few powerful punches and kicks, he took down all the henchmen surrounding him. The man in the red suit watched in fury as his subordinates fell one by one. He realized that Bruno was no ordinary person, so he decided not to play fair anymore. Taking advantage of Bruno's momentary lapse in vigilance, he struck a sneak attack, and a bloody wound immediately appeared on Bruno's arm. At the same time, the bearded man was not idle either. Like a hound with a sharp nose, he scoured everywhere for any trace of Athena. Eventually, he found Athena trembling in the restroom. Bruno, pinned to the ground by the man in the red suit, was unable to move. The man in the red suit warned him maliciously, "Stay away from Athena. Next time, it won't just be a simple cut like this." Bruno watched helplessly as the bearded man took Athena away. All of his emotions surged up, and his vision went black before he lost consciousness. Uncertain of how much time had passed, Bruno woke up, ignoring the wound on his body. He went to Fitch's house for help, asking to borrow her car keys. When Fitch saw Bruno in such a disheveled state, she was startled, and worriedly asked where he was going and what had happened to him. Bruno, unable to hide the truth, had to explain everything. He told her in detail about Athena being taken away by someone else. Fitch was both shocked and angry upon hearing this. She quickly began to work on her laptop. With the scattered information Bruno had provided, Fitch, with her detective-like technological mind, was incredibly skilled. She quickly pinpointed a location where Athena might be hidden. Furthermore, she uncovered some concerning information. The people there were using flowers to create a sedative for the purpose of robbery. This was the same detail from earlier when Bruno had been drugged by the woman. Additionally, 5 missing persons cases had occurred in that area, and they had yet to be solved. This wasn't just a regular robbery, it was a beauty theft, along with illegal activities. Both of them were increasingly anxious after hearing this. With no time to waste, they decided to act immediately and set out to find Athena. The hero saving the damsel in distress scenario couldn't be neglected. They changed into discreet outfits and went to a bar filled with decadence, aiming to gather information or lure their target. They ordered 2 drinks, hoping to blend in quietly. Sitting in a secluded corner, they carefully observed those around them. Soon after, they noticed something unusual. It seemed like someone was secretly watching them and had targeted them. Bruno's vigilance heightened. He recalled the painful experience from before when he had been drugged, so this time, he firmly refused to touch the alcohol, afraid of falling into another trap. After all, a hero saving the damsel couldn't fall because of alcohol. As for Fitch, she was completely carefree, not at all concerned about the previous unpleasant incident. She drank the entire glass of liquor in one go, but don't let her calm demeanor fool you. This was just the warm-up, before she began her investigation. Indeed, beauty was the key. Not long after, an inconsiderate man came over to strike up a conversation, eagerly offering a special cocktail. Fitch, confident in her abilities, accepted and finished the drink in one go. Afterward, the man began to make inappropriate advances. This time, he had picked the wrong person. Bruno immediately jumped in to help. The two worked together seamlessly to drag the man into the car. After a thorough search, they indeed found some sedatives on him. This wasn't just any simple drug, it was a substance that made people obey. Bruno's interrogation method was simple and brutal. When the man regained consciousness, Bruno immediately forced him to reveal the source of the sedatives. The man, a coward at heart, quickly spilled the beans, admitting he had obtained the drugs at a party. He even led the two to the place where the drugs were bought. Bruno and Fitch, of course, didn't let this lead slip away. They immediately drove straight to the mysterious party. Upon arrival, they encountered a diligent gatekeeper. Afterward, they subdued all the rogues at the party. They then dragged a man dressed in loud floral clothes into the car like a lifeless body. The man in floral clothing initially acted quite aggressively, pretending to be hard to deal with. However, after a few loving punches from Bruno, he quickly surrendered and behaved obediently like a puppy. Bruno took out a pill without saying a word and forced it into the man's mouth. Not long after, under the effects of the drug, the man fell unconscious. After obtaining important information, Fitch and Bruno exchanged glances. They stuffed the man into the trunk of the car and drove off from the party. Their next destination was a mysterious factory. When they arrived at the factory gate, another diligent gatekeeper appeared, trying once again to block their path. This time, Bruno acted faster. They drove straight into the factory, ready to uncover the deeper mysteries inside. Inside, Bruno and Fitch quickly prepared the necessary equipment for their operation, appearing organized as if rehearsing for a great battle. Just as they were busy, a black sedan quietly approached. Bruno immediately crouched to observe, trying to understand what was going on. However, the factory was like a military compound, heavily guarded with patrols everywhere. Bruno knew that a direct confrontation wasn't a wise move. If they were going to act, they needed to carry out a stealthy infiltration first. Next, with his agile reflexes, Bruno slipped past the guards like a shadow, silently and efficiently dealing with anyone blocking his path. Finally, Bruno discovered his target, the man in the red suit, whom he had previously faced, and the burly bearded man. The situation had become more complicated. However, this time, Bruno was clearly more mature, no longer acting impulsively like before. He wisely chose a different approach. He secretly placed a tracking device on their car to facilitate future monitoring. But as he was preparing to quietly retreat, an unexpected incident occurred. Just as Bruno was about to leave, an unknown assailant lunged at him, kicking him in the chest and causing him to stumble and fall. The surprise attack caught Bruno off guard. Meanwhile, Fitch, who was waiting outside, faced an unexpected attacker, the man in the floral shirt, whom they had previously captured. However, this floral-shirted man clearly underestimated Fitch's skills. She quickly regained her composure, pulled out her gun, and prepared to rescue Bruno, who was now in danger. As for Bruno, he was indeed in a tough spot, restrained by the red-suited man. The red-suited man wanted to extract information from Bruno, forcing him to reveal who he worked for. But Bruno's mouth was not so easily pried open. When the questioning yielded no results, the red-suited man, in a fit of rage, swung his hand and ordered his subordinates to deal with Bruno. However, this time, the red-suited man had underestimated Bruno's strength. Just as several of his men raised their weapons to shoot Bruno in the head, Bruno easily counterattacked. He took on 3 of them effortlessly, handling the situation with ease. Meanwhile, as Bruno fought fiercely, Fitch successfully breached the defenses and stormed in from the other side. Together, they began a powerful assault. They quickly dealt with the enemies in front of them, but despite their extraordinary ordinary skills, the sheer number of opponents and their heavy firepower proved overwhelming. Even though Bruno and Fitch were formidable, they were eventually outnumbered and outgunned. Just as Bruno was about to lose his life, the silence of the factory was shattered by gunshots. A figure appeared like a god descending from the heavens. It was Bruno's good friend, Joe. Holding a gun, he unleashed a barrage of bullets, instantly turning the tide and pulling Bruno back from the brink of death. Bruno stared at Joe in shock. This was absolutely an unexpected surprise. Joe didn't offer much explanation. Despite being in the midst of a life-and-death battle, their deep friendship allowed them to exchange a few brief words amidst the intense gunfire. Indeed, the cruelty of fate always comes unexpectedly. Just after they finished talking, Joe was fortunately shot and severely wounded. At the same time, the situation outside was just as dire. Fitch was also in a tough spot, being chased everywhere. The enemy's advantage in numbers and weaponry was overwhelming. Fitch could only dodge and worryingly call for help from Bruno through her earpiece. But at that moment, Bruno was also fighting non-stop. He and Joe were surrounded by enemies and could only engage in close combat. Watching him solve one opponent after another with his fists, one couldn't help but wonder why Bruno didn't just pick up a gun instead of fighting with his bare hands. Finally, after a fierce hand-to-hand battle, Bruno sighed with relief as he eliminated the enemies around him. But the price he paid was unbearably painful. His good friend, Joe, had collapsed in a pool of blood. Using his last ounce of strength, Joe said a few final words to Bruno. Then, this loyal friend passed away. Bruno, stifling his grief, closed Joe's eyes in pain. This scene was truly heartbreaking. Outside, Fitch had also successfully repelled her pursuers, but having lost too much blood, she was no longer able to fight. Hearing through her earpiece that Joe had fallen in battle, she too was deeply saddened. She then told Bruno that she could no longer help him, but would send him Krieger's location and offer support from a distance. The fire of revenge blazed fiercely in Bruno's heart. He gripped the motorcycle's handlebars tightly, donned his helmet, and immediately set off toward Krieger's location. The objective was clear: to avenge his brother and rescue Athena. Through the tracking device, Bruno easily found Krieger. He then quietly followed Krieger, infiltrating a mysterious research facility. As an expert in infiltration, Bruno first dealt with the gatekeeper, and then made a very smart decision. He swapped clothes with the gatekeeper, immediately blending in as an insider. He then boldly infiltrated the experimental area to surprise Krieger. Everything seemed to be under his control. Bruno searched the entire facility, and before him was a field of blooming flowers, which turned out to be the raw material for making sedatives. It seemed Krieger's operations were far from small scale. This further convinced Bruno that he had found an important lead. To make his actions smoother, Bruno decided to use an unfortunate doctor as his guide. With his gun in hand, he convincingly ordered the doctor to lead him to the surveillance room. The doctor, understanding the situation, saw the dark muzzle of the gun and immediately obediently led the way. However, things didn't go as smoothly as expected. Upon reaching the surveillance room, the doctor played a trick. He quietly used Ty to signal to someone inside, declaring that he was under control. Upon hearing this, the people in the surveillance room immediately became alert and wasted no time activating the alarm. The alarm sounded, and the atmosphere immediately became tense. Seeing this, Bruno had no choice but to act quickly. He immediately contacted Fitch, who was at home, through his earpiece. At that moment, Fitch was bandaging her wounds, but she was not only an expert in hand-to-hand combat but also a skilled tech specialist. Her fingers swiftly moved across the keyboard, and before long, Fitch used her computer skills like magic to help Bruno successfully disable the alarm via the remotely connected surveillance system. A horrifying secret began to unravel. Fitch discovered that the facility was conducting research for a project initiated by a professor who initially planned to edit DNA to fight cancer. What was even more shocking was that they found Athena was created from the DNA of 5 missing girls by this scientist. The screen began to show Athena's past, from her innocent childhood, the shy teenager in high school, to becoming the wife of the scientist, and finally transforming into a soulless puppet. The brutal truth filled Bruno with an overwhelming sense of hatred. He finally understood everything, and became even more determined for revenge. He said goodbye to the images of the past on the screen, walked outside, and prepared to continue searching for Athena and avenging his brother Joe. On his way, Bruno fought through group after group of guards. At this point, the fire of vengeance burned fiercely in his eyes. Each hand-to-hand combat, each gunfight, contained all the anger and pain he had endured. He was like a lion, enraged and unstoppable, swearing to deal with every enemy in his path. Finally, Bruno overcame all the obstacles and made it to the upper floor. Here, he faced his old adversary, the man in the red suit. However, in this life-or-death confrontation, an even more important figure appeared. He was the true mastermind behind this plot, Dr. Kovalovsky, who had gone insane. This medical doctor, who appeared to be a degenerate scholar, harbored terrifying ambitions. He even targeted Bruno, intending to use his DNA to complete his next grand project. But Bruno was no lamb to be slaughtered by others. He didn't care at all about the mad words of the doctor. His only focus was to deal with the man in the red suit in front of him. Both were masters, with extremely high combat abilities. The battle was incredibly tough. Bruno had gone through many brutal fights before. His physical and mental strength were exhausted. In the confrontation with the man in the red suit, he gradually felt himself weakening, starting to fall into a disadvantage. He was almost unable to fight back anymore. At this critical moment, Dr. Kovalovsky spoke up. His words were filled with obsession and pain. He told Bruno that he had spent a great deal of manpower and resources to create Athena, with the goal of resurrecting his late wife, and he would absolutely not allow Bruno to take Athena away. But after hearing this, Bruno showed no intention of giving up. His gaze was firm as he looked at the doctor and said, "She is a free person." This simple statement struck at the weakest point in the doctor's heart. The doctor reacted angrily, rebutting, "So what? She doesn't have the right to choose." Bruno, undeterred, replied, "That is her choice." The doctor considered Bruno's words as an insult to his efforts, as mocking the pain of losing his wife. He was completely provoked, angrily ordering the man in the red suit to kill Bruno immediately. Thus, under the doctor's command, an even more chaotic battle erupted. Bruno and the man in the red suit clashed again. For Athena, for justice, he had to fight to the end. Bruno directly twisted the red-suited man's neck, killing him on the spot. Just as Bruno thought he could finally breathe a sigh of relief, the situation turned on its head. The doctor appeared like a ghost, locking his arms around Bruno's neck and dragging him into a dark room, preparing to inject him with poison. In that split second, with his life hanging by a thread, Bruno unleashed his last surge of strength. With his remaining energy, he managed to twist the syringe around and drive it into the doctor's own body. This move was truly a masterstroke, reversing the situation in an instant. Finally, Bruno found Athena, the one he had longed for. Athena, strong-willed as ever, didn't hesitate for a second, and immediately followed Bruno. Before leaving, she even delivered a cool kick to the doctor. The two escaped the encirclement and didn't forget to gift the research facility with a fiery love explosion, burning the beautiful flowers outside. This fire burned the crimes and lit the path of hope. In the end, Bruno and Athena returned to their cozy home. From then on, they lived a life full of happiness and fulfillment. The value of a film lies in its fame, while the value of a film review lies in its impressions. The story ends here today. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.